Let's get spooky. This is our Station Boo, where we explore the dark and mysterious corners of the world of horror, and we know that you are dying to listen.
All right, and welcome to the Spooky and Kooky podcast of Earth Station Boo, where we talk all things horror. Introducing our lovely haunted hosts, we have Lisa.
Hello, cool-tastic people.
Karen, unfortunately, is not able to be with us today while we're recording, but her and I are going to get together and we're going to talk horror literature later on. But we are with a couple of really amazing people. We have Carol, who's been on the podcast before, and we have my friend Dominic, who is new to the podcast. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Yay.
The thousands and thousands. Thank you.
And
all your fans, Dominic, all your fans.
And then today we are going to be diving into the history of horror literature, which is extremely vast. And so we're going to try to make it as short and sweet as we possibly can, like we did for films earlier.
Hey Horrorholics, it's Shannon. Earth Station Boo has just launched its brand new merch store. It's time to get your hands on some killer gear. From our fun logo shirts, cozy hoodies, Let's Get Spooky stickers, and Horrorholics Anonymous totes, there's something for every one of our lovely little ghouls. We offer our spooky designs on many different types of products to fit your desires. But if you happen to see a missed opportunity, just let us know. And unlike most of Stephen King's adaptations, you know what I'm talking about, you won't be disappointed with the quality of the products. Head over to our link tree in our bio, grab your merch, show off your favorite horror podcast, and most of all, let's get spooky.
All right, so today we are talking about the history of horror literature. But before we dive in too deep, let's go ahead and give our lovely guests an opportunity to introduce themselves so you, the listener, know why we love these two so very much. Carol, would you like to start real quick?
Sure. I'm the director of the Dragon Con Urban Fantasy track, and I actually, the horror track there is my partner in crime / sibling / whatever you want to call us. But we've been good friends for many years, and actually the two tracks actually were combined into one in the beginning called Dark Fantasy, and in 2013 split into Urban Fantasy and Horror. So we have remained close ties. So that is kind of the history of the track. As far as horror literature goes, I've been a fan for quite a while, and especially of the more of the older stuff, of the classic stuff. So,
okay, Dominic, let these lovely people get to know you a little bit.
Oh, hello, lovely people. I am fortunate enough to be the book buyer at a local St. Pete haunt book and bottle, wine bar, cafe, bookstore. I help manage the place, help run.
It's the best place to be.
Oh, please. Your check's in the mail. It's a pretty sick place, I have to say. I started a horror book club there. I help run their fiction book club. I have always been drawn to the weird and the wild when it comes to reading. I was homeschooled, and my mother allowed me to pick whatever books I wanted in order to write my essays. And so I read Ray Bradbury at a very young age. So The Halloween Tree, October Country, Something Wicked This Way Comes were all blueprints for a young boy falling in love with fall and everything macabre. So, yeah, you can blame Bradbury for what I...
Did you ever get to meet him? Did you ever meet him?
I never got to meet him. I do have a few of his signed books, which is lovely and as close to life. Did you?
Very cool.
No, I didn't. And he actually had been at Dragon Con a few times, apparently. It was before my tenure there. I started working there in 2008. But it was prior to that. But like you, I do have a couple of signed books. So, yeah.
Yeah, magical pen that one had. Yeah,
Oh,
phenomenal.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So let's go ahead and kind of dive in, kind of with like our initial thoughts, but I want us to kind of talk about why we love horror literature so much. Carol, would you like to start?
Sure. I think there's, at least for me, I'm not interested in things, whether it's on the page or on the screen, in things that are excessively gory, but I like things that are really spooky. And I think there is something about the mystery of it. We all have those moments anyway where we say, okay, what was that noise? Or what if this thing that I thought I saw really was what my reading material tells me it might be. I think there's that aspect of it. It's the mystery, and as I said, I don't mind being scared now. Because I do like to be able to sleep at night, but well, that's another story.
That's
But
fair.
sometimes the horrors of trying to go to sleep are not related to horror at all. So anyway, that's my general interest.
Yeah. Dominic?
I think what draws me back to literature over and over again is that I get to be my own director. And so, to a certain extent, the writer will give you what you need, but they can't tell you everything, or the book would be thousands and thousands of pages long.
Yeah.
So you get to control a lot of the world you inhabit. And so the characters can kind of become way more ingrained into who you are and your identity and what you bring to the text than a movie. Movies can do that, absolutely. But if they want you to see blood, you'll see blood.
Yeah.
Sure.
But a writer can say blood and we can censor it ourselves, right? We can
Mhm.
kind of say how much or how little,
Right.
depending obviously on the writer. Um, but what I love is just how cerebral writing gets, and how deeper of a scare it can bring me and how more deeply unsettled I can be. Movies, it takes a lot nowadays to shock me, and they keep doing it. But I don't want to be shocked. I want to be unsettled. And like
Right.
books do that for me in a much faster and easier way with the certain authors. It's a very refined art, and I'm constantly going back to masters and modern masters as to how they're pulling off this magic trick. And I think that's also why I keep coming back.
I can agree with that. Lisa, how about
Yeah.
you?
I started reading horror when I was like 11, and I really liked the way that it pushed my imagination, which I think helps me in what I do now. There are some things I agree with you, Dominic. It's sometimes movies are just not scary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they use the same old tricks and they don't use it, and it all depends on the director too and who they would. But I like the fact that when you're in a book, you can actually literally scare yourself because you will hear creaks. And I live in a house that's like made in the 20s, so that's all kinds of fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it inspires me because I can get creative and I do illustrations and stuff on what I think the creature would be or whatever was happening or how macabre or what was not there but was there. So, yeah, I think I really enjoy it. And I've been reading it since I was like young. And Bradbury is definitely one of the authors that I used to read. I remember my Nana had the Halloween tree at her house, and that's when I started reading it. So it's one of my favorite Ray Bradbury stories.
Absolutely.
H.P. Lovecraft kind of said it perfectly. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And I think there's a beauty to that. It's primal, it's natural, it's something that just the littlest spark of imagination, we can run wild with it. And I think literature gives us that, where we can just run wild with the what ifs. If you guys haven't listened to our Poe episode, when we talked about Poe and we talked about the tell heart, we're like, was this guy in the will? What did this guy gain from killing this man? And we talked about all the different ins and outs. When we talked about the black cat, like, what was some of the motivation in that? And we even theorized about him being what we would know now as a serial killer. And so it's like, it gets you thinking, it gets you moving, it makes you ask questions. And I think literature does that the best when it comes to the horror genre. The world is our oyster when it comes to that. Dominic, like you said, like, unless the writer specifically tells you it was a kilo of, blood everywhere or whatever the measurement would be, like, unless they say that, you could picture, a Carrie bloodbath, or you could picture a paper cut, like, or anything in between.
Yes.
So
I love what you said about like the littlest spark can just send you on your on this wild ride, because like movies are a visual medium.
mhm,
We always say in horror, it's what you don't see that scares you.
yeah,
So they're constantly
Mm.
playing the game of like, we're going to show you, but we won't show you. It's like
mhm,
peekaboo in
yeah,
horror. And I'm not a child. And so I feel like in horror literature, we can come at it as adults who still have these primal childish fears, and they
mhm,
can play way more with what we're not seeing, we're not
yeah,
hearing. Yeah, I love that.
exactly.
Mhm.
So to give you all just a brief rundown when it comes to horror history, I kind of did some research and
Kinda.
like
Never.
kind of. I did not have a hyper fixation with my ADHD on this. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yes, I did. Uh, but we're gonna kind of like break it down and kind of like get to like the nitty gritty. In what I have discovered, I find that horror literature, as we know it today, started with stories around the campfire. They were all oral tales. A lot of it came from folklore, mythology, even religious theology teachings. And so back in ancient times, so like 1000 AD and prior, that's what it was. Very little of it was actually written down, and what was written down got changed because it depended on who was writing what and all that kind of deal. So you have Greek mythology, Roman mythology, the Book of Revelation in the Bible. You have pre-Han Dynasty in Chinese mythology. You have the folklore from the San tribe in Africa. All of them have folklore and beautiful stories that depict horror or horror-like elements because there was a teaching to it. There was a reason behind it. Then we come to the Middle Ages. Oh, the Middle Ages. That's just horror all on its own.
Called the Dark Ages for a reason.
Yeah. But when it came
Give me those castles and those cathedrals. I'm there. I'm
right.
Yeah.
But medieval times did bring forth more supernatural aspects. So you had the birth of werewolves and vampires, as we would be able to understand that creature being. You had those emerging. You also had the start of influence of real life individuals who were extremely cruel and had reputations that came along long before they did, kind of deal. You also had the evolution of folklore and mythology and even theologies, and how they progressively went more supernatural and less realistic than what was before. So with all of that, you also have the evolution of writing itself, and allegories started coming through. So you have examples like Beowulf, the Divine Comedy, even Shakespeare are examples of horror-like elements in that time frame. But then we enter the 18th century, so the 1700s, where it starts to get good, was what I like to say.
Yeah, it's really tasty. Like,
Yeah.
you can really start to pinpoint beginnings.
Yeah, where you can really define horror as a genre, starting in this century. You have the birth of Gothic horrors based on late medieval happenings. So like Vlad the Impaler, Elizabeth Bathory, individuals like that. This is where horror as a genre really gets set apart from other writings, and it kind of even steps away from where it came from, folklore, mythology, and all that. But you also see a significant amount of horror being written by women
Yes.
for women. So
Yeah, it was considered something that they could do. That's why.
Yeah.
Yep. A prime example would be Anne Radcliffe, and one of her books would be The Romance of the Forest. A notable piece of work, though, from that time frame is the Castle of Otranto.
Otranto.
Yeah.
Otranto.
Otranto.
And it's bonkers. If anybody's, it's fun. It's fun.
I feel like I always mispronounce that one. Then we go into the 19th century, so the 1800s. This is where a lot of non-horror people know horror individuals or writers from that time period. But the 19th century, you have Gothic traditional, which comes about. It's a little bit different than Gothic horror, but along the same veins. More stories from this time frame are actually adapted to film in the golden age of horror cinema and the stage. So it wasn't just film, it was also on the stages. And an increase of oral storytelling cultures being published, so that way their folklore is being heard for the first time, as well as the introduction of horror comics, which I think is kind of cool. So examples of works from this time frame would be anything from the Brothers Grimm. You have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You have The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Edgar Allan Poe is a prime example of an author from that time frame. And you have the beloved Penny Dreadfuls that also were like a keynote from that time frame. 20th century, so 1900s. A lot of people know this one because most of us were alive during that time frame. But you have more of like a cosmic horror, which became popular, and it was redefining ghost stories. There was the recurring theme of serial murders that also was happening in real time. As we've discussed on this podcast, horror reflects reality. So if something's increasing in reality, you know it's going to start happening in horror. You also have the introduction of zombies, and you have the more exposure to non-European horror literature. There was also a ban on horror comics due to the quote-unquote gruesome context. But you have H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, Anne Rice, Ramsey Campbell, and Shirley Jackson as examples. And now we come to the modern day. The expanse of subgenres in horror has expounded greatly, as well as horror adjacent genres like urban fantasy, werewolf fiction, alternate history. And you also have the growth of children's horror, such as Goosebumps, that people kind of started getting into. You also see the growth and experimentation of the genre in all of its different medias, so not just literature. And you're also finding more diversity with writers in the genre and pulling from their own cultural backgrounds. So like I said already, you have R.L. Stein's Goosebumps, but you have Marina Enriquez, you have Grady Hendrix, and then Stephen Graham Jones as some notable authors in the genre. So now that we've got that out of the way, I feel like I was talking forever, but let's talk about the importance of horror literature and the history of it and where it came from and all of that. Dominic, do you want to start us on that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I love that you said is how sometimes I think it's very interesting that Dean Koontz, Stephen King, Peter Straub really was they were masters of the horror genre. Stephen King's the best-selling author, I believe, of all time. Might want to check me on that, but I believe that's still true.
I've got Google.
Yeah, we have Google. We can disprove me right away. But I think it's fascinating that when we think of horror, especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we're thinking of men like Clive Barker and Stephen King. But horror has always been a woman's game.
Mhm.
Always been a woman's game. And also has always had the subgenre of romance,
Yeah.
with romance or sex, plainly enough. That was like especially in like The Monk, which comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While that
You
is,
got me on that one. I was going to bring that. That's another crazy pants one. My gosh.
yes, Matthew Lewis. It's published in 1796 across 3 volumes. He wrote it before he turned 20. Go him, Jesus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's called The Monk, a Romance. And it's about this monk who gives into lustful urges and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So that is an absolutely bonkers book that has romance in the title, and obviously is not necessarily what we'd think of as a romance, but it's definitely playing with those tropes.
Right.
Like you said about Anne Radcliffe, and even the castles of what was how do you say it again? Yes,
Toronto.
thank
Oh,
you.
Toronto. Yeah.
Otranto, even though that one's written by a man, it has a female lead.
Mhm.
And then we fast forward a century, and we have Mary Shelley. What you could say is inventing 2 genres in
Yeah.
one go. She is not only inventing horror, but she is inventing science fiction. In 1818, I think she was younger than 20 doing
Yeah,
this.
she was a teenager.
And yeah, doing it on a bet.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It was a
What can
bet
you
and a
come up with in
competition.
20 minutes? Yeah.
Right? A competition while it was a thunderstorm and they had nothing better to do. And she was like, "Okay, I'll invent 2 genres because I'm that damn good. How about that? How about that, husband?"
Yeah.
Do it,
Right?
Right, Kelly. So it's phenomenal to see now more and more female authors being recognized and kind of reclaiming the genre for their own. I mean, this
Yeah.
is reflected also in horror films, right? The idea of the
Yeah.
final girl trope, right?
I mean, Bela Lugosi even said it. Horror belongs to women.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
That's so yeah. I think it's really cool. The more you do your research, the more that we're seeing sort of this reclaiming of what already belonged
Hmm.
to people that we would think of, especially at that time, as more marginalized.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And yes, you're correct. Stephen King is the most renowned horror author. He sold over 350 million books.
That's
Yeah.
Wow.
According to Forbes.
good for him.
Carol, how about you? Why do you think horror literature and the history of it is so important?
Well, I think that to Dominic's point, that there's something about what women go through or can go through if you do go through childbirth. There are a lot, there are some horrors that even now, that can be kind of daunting, but I think that is part of the reason that it became something that women were interested in, because it's kind of a metaphor for what some of the things are that they go through in real life. And I think that one of the things that to me is so interesting is that in that 18th century, with the Gothic, the Gothic was this, was kind of a result of people giving in to emotion, or not only emotion, but being able to really feel things. It was okay to have, this ecstasy of feeling, and it's not sexual ecstasy, although that probably played into it for Byron and stuff. But I mean, for um, it was this intense emotion that could cause all of these feelings, and that it somehow furthered development as a person. And so horror was one way to, to do that. And the funny note, I'm glad you mentioned the monk, because when I read that, it's been several years ago now, but when I read that, I was like, oh my God, this guy is bonkers. Because the thing about Radcliffe stuff is that she wrote what was called the explained Gothic. So that, they would you'd be going through all these things. And then by the end, it's all explained away as to what was really going on. No, there wasn't really this creepy supernatural thing going on. It was really something else. I guess she kind of, led up to Scooby-Doo. I don't know. So but Lewis was a big fan of hers, and apparently wrote The Monk because he was such a big fan of her style, and she was appalled. So, because their styles are very different. And so I'm not sure if it was The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is, a doorstop of a book, 500 or 600 pages, that I think it was that one that she wrote in response to him, like, okay, I'll show him, but then when you think about these people being the precursors to, the 19th century, and, when we get our Dracula, and, beginning with Mary Shelley and leading up to all those things. To me, that's a fascinating journey to watch that or to see that happen, where it goes through these slight changes, but how it became, how it became kind of an outgrowth of intensity of emotion, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Lisa, how about you?
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with both Dominic and Carol, and I think it is important to watch the evolution of how it goes from the beginnings into what we have now. And what do they say? How hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So that's why it's really good for the female genre, because I know a couple of female horror writers that are friends of mine, and some of the stuff they put out is like inspired by Shelley and everything, and some of it's a little bit more intense than some of the others. And being a female myself, I can certainly feel for it, but I think it's very important that we learn where it came from, because there's so much that we can learn about humanities and behaviors and fear and the different levels of it and how it evolved through the centuries until modern day.
Yeah.
And it also keeps everybody's imagination fresh.
Of course. And like I said earlier, horror reflects reality. You can definitely see it in horror cinema the most of, what is culturally going on for the writers and the directors of those films. You can see how it transpired, it matches and their storytelling. But even more so with literature, when you go back and you look at where we came from, what happened during that time frame, and you can see it from individuals who at most of those individuals at that time were paupers. These were not the rich and famous. These were not the elite. These were not the people who, didn't have any cares or worries. These were people who had to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet, let alone buy the paper to write what they wanted to write. Yeah. A lot of them didn't find favor until later on in life when it came to their works. But I just love seeing how, even though there is such a drastic change from like ancient folklore to, Stephen King's writings, how what still scares us is the same.
Right.
What still causes us to have that fight or flight is still the same. There's that instinctual, human, animalistic thing that grabs hold of us, that causes our heart rate to go up a little bit, that causes us to hunch and scrunch and walk slowly forward. And And the way that it can be done with just a couple of words is breathtaking. I mean, I think some of my all-time favorite books in general are horror books, and it's because they're written so beautifully. And when you see the evolution of how just writing went to create these beautiful works of art, how can you not appreciate and have massive respect for the history of it?
Yeah.
So, what's everybody's favorite century of horror? I can start with that one.
Okay, go.
Personally, mine is going to be the 19th century. So the 1800s. That's my sweet spot. That's probably what I read the most for like pleasure. It's not that I don't like a lot of the other stuff. It's just that's like the stuff that I'm like, oh, I just want something comfy, cozy to read up again. Here we go. And it's usually something from that time frame. But my favorite book is the Divine Comedy, specifically Inferno, which is very horror centric when it came to medieval-esque time frame of things.
Yeah, I mean, he literally brings you to hell. What's more horrible?
Yeah. Here, let's take a tour. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to be able to sit there and describe what the gates of hell look like, and then saying it says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Like,
yeah, top tier warning, dude.
Oh yeah.
The final boss is the devil. Like, come on, it's how do you...
But then, did you know that there's a secret gate to go up to heaven from there? Like,
wild.
Lisa, do you want to go next?
I want to ask you, what's the most underrated book from that time period?
Oh,
I mean, because we can Wikipedia that century, but I want to hear your perspective on like what's talk about more that's not Frankenstein or Dracula.
I'm gonna have to think on that.
Think about it. Come back around.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that because to me a lot of it's like classic, like iconic classic. You can't go wrong. So I'm like, so much to choose from.
Well, and there are a lot of things that, as you pointed out before, they weren't popular in their time. That they became so. We think of them as classics, but at the time that those authors were living, they weren't all the big hits that came later. And I think that was especially true in the up through about the middle of the 19th century.
Yeah.
With, poor Poe.
Yeah, poor Poe.
Oh, yeah. I want a little like stuffed Poe with sad face, just like, oh, poor
Poe. Give him the snuggles that he deserves.
Exactly. Yeah.
So not Dominic, now, since he's not in that great a shape at this point. But yeah,
I mean,
it's just dust.
That's right.
Yeah, I was snuggling poor Poe.
So, with that being the case, Dominic, what is your favorite century?
I mean, any century that has Shirley Jackson's work is going to be pretty high up there, and Bradbury's work. So 20th century is pretty delicious.
Yeah,
man, it is a good time to be a horror fan. So I'm going to say the 21st century.
Okay.
I brought home a bag of books from the imprint of Tor, which is from Macmillan, all horror, and all sound incredible, and from all walks of life, all backgrounds, religious, like Central America, we got everything. And so at our fingertips is any style that we could like. So I gotta go 21st century, baby.
Okay. Lisa, how about you?
That's hard. I mean, I like 19th century, but I mean, because I love the Grimm's fairy tales and everything, because they're grim and dark and lessons and not this Disney stuff that these kids are exposed to nowadays. But I also like the 21st century because I actually started, I was reading Bradbury, and I have all my dad's old creepy comic books from that time. yeah, like he left them all to me, so I look through them every once in a while, smell the newsprint. But yeah, so it's kind of hard. I'd have to say it's even between the 19th and 21st century.
Okay. That's fair. Absolutely fair. Carol, how about you?
I think I would probably go with 19th, and I think that's partly because it dealt more with the type of horror that I guess that I appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about the Gothic earlier and the intensity of feeling, I mean, all that affected the romantic period in the United States, and that you got people like Hawthorne and Poe, and not everybody thinks of Hawthorne as a horror writer, but read The House of Seven Gables, and that's when you find out that he actually did write some as well. But it's and a lot of his short stories are pretty horrifying, and also lean towards science fiction. And I think as part of the reason that I enjoy that century is because they're dealing with so many different genres or subgenres that they're working their way up to, and you get little bits of one out of somebody, and then you get more out of somebody else. And that's not to say I don't appreciate some of the modern writers, but I do really like the 19th century version of horror, and to me, and culminating in Dracula. So,
yeah, I mean, there's also a romanticism there that
sure, yeah,
isn't necessarily there in like more modern stuff. Even though, yes, there is romance in these books, it's different. There's almost as like a sly seductiveness to the 1900 or the 19th century stuff versus like today, which is a little bit more outright and forthcoming.
Right. There's something about the hidden that shows up in some of those older things. And that's what interests me, frankly. I mean, that's my, that's what gets me going down the rabbit hole after them is that kind of thing. Don't make it as too obvious. Let me, let me try to figure it
out. Like I mentioned earlier, Dante's Divine Comedy is one of my personal favorites when it comes to works. What is y'all's? Lisa, you want to start us off?
Yeah, one of my, I will have to say, I'm a big Clive Barker fan, so one of my favorites is Hellbound Heart and the Books of Blood. I love short stories a lot. So I mean, some of his stuff is really graphic, but he's such a great storyteller that he doesn't expose it all the time. So your mind just wanders. So I'll definitely have to say Cabal and Hellbound Heart and the Books of Blood. I know that's more than one, but he's just a good writer.
That's okay. I didn't say you can only pick one. So, Carol, how about you?
Well, I've mentioned it a few times, so my guess is that I would probably say Dracula. If push comes to shove, when you're talking about novel length material, there are a number of different short stories that and I'm a big Poe fan as well, so there are a lot of those that are very that are up there on my list that are scary. But when it comes to the full length work, I think it would have to be Dracula, and I think that's mainly because it incorporates so many of those things that I like or that I enjoy about horror. The supernatural aspect, the atmosphere, the never really knowing, and just some of the imagery. I mean, after the first time I read Dracula, and I kept seeing it and thinking of it. The scene with him climbing up the walls of the castle when Harker sees him and he's like, "Whoa, what's going?" That scene in and of itself, it's like, that just
it goes to show you, even all the films.
Right.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's anyway. But I think I would probably end up picking that. Although now that I've been asked, I'll probably be thinking about it and say, "Oh, I should have said such and such." But I think in general, Dracula is probably my go-to in
You
terms
can
of
always come back, add it in the Facebook group, be like, thought about it, guys.
yeah,
Here's some of the other
right.
ones that I really loved.
Yeah. Here's the list. Here's the list.
Yeah.
All right, Dominic, how about you?
I am going to say when it comes to classics, it has to be The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Like when you make
Yeah.
a book so good that Stephen King does not want to do a haunted house story because you did it so well,
Right.
it makes The
Yeah.
Shining a hotel. You did that shit and you did it good, you know?
Yep.
And you can make the case that The Haunting of Hill House is coded as an LGBTQ book with
Mhm.
Eleanor and the other female characters, electricity between them. It's just pound for pound, every page reeks of dread. Every page reeks of the Gothic, despite being several centuries removed from the tradition. And Shirley Jackson was like also writing good housekeeping articles at the time.
Right.
Like she
Exactly. Yeah.
She was.
this double
Yeah.
life that was so
Not a
resplendent,
double life, a well-rounded life.
a well-rounded life, a well-rounded life. And so I adore anything by Shirley Jackson. That's why my favorite modern author is Mariana Enriquez, and he's an Argentinian journalist who moonlights as a short story horror writer.
Oh.
Which, by the way, thank you for introducing me to her.
Oh, you're so welcome. It is my job as a bookseller to tell people about Argentinian female horror writers. So come to me if
There
you
you
need it.
go. Yeah.
But like what you said earlier, Shannon, about like horror starts at the campfire,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, Mariana is the campfire.
Very much so.
So her newest book, A Sunny Place for Shady People, came out today, and people
Ooh.
should read it. People need to read it. If you're a
A
horror fan,
sunny place for shady people is what you said.
yes, that is the name
Yeah.
of it.
That's a
Mhm.
great title right there.
Mhm.
It's so great. I can't speak highly enough about her, so
Yeah.
she is my favorite.
Which, by the way, Dominic, here's your official invitation when we do the book review of Things We Lost in the Fire. Hi, we'd love to have you on.
Oh, wonderful.
And when we do the book review of The Haunting of Hill House, we'll have to have you on because
Sick.
we're recording this episode way ahead of time. And so when this episode is being recorded that week, we are actually releasing our Haunting of Hill House review.
Oh,
So it was like perfect that you mentioned that because I'm like, oh, hey, that's actually the one that we're releasing this week. I was just editing it like 30 minutes before the call. And to answer your question, the book that I was thinking of, and I don't know if it is from the 1800s or like the really early 1900s, is The Golem.
Sick.
Mm.
Very cool.
I think that one is a pretty underrated one. I like the lore that's behind it, as well as story itself.
Because is it the golem as in the Jewish folklore of creating the...
It's tied to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love
It's
it.
tied to it. Yeah. By Gustav Marinick.
Cool.
Marek? I always feel bad. I always say people's last names wrong.
He's on a...
We're gonna kind of start to wrap this up a little bit. And part of that wrapping up is I want you guys' final thoughts on the history of horror literature. But I also want you guys to talk about what your hopes are for the genre, specifically in literature, because right now we are in a state of flux when it comes to a lot of genres, or a lot of medias. So be it film, literature, even stage production. A lot of these medias are having to change because of technology, and because of how we're telling our stories now. And so we're in this state of flux, and you can definitely see it in, I would say, more in the film industry, because the ages have been centered more around like subgenres that have been popularized during that time frame. But horror literature as a whole has started to boom. So let's get our final thoughts and our hopes for the genre. Lisa, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Okay, well, of course, horror literature is a good start in any diving into horror in general. It shows the evolution of everything, and as far as fear, and that, like you said, we're all still afraid of the same things. I'd like to see a lot more cultural horror. I actually enjoy different folklore from different races, different cultures, not races, but different cultures. I read a lot. My friend brought me a Hawaiian folklore book from Hawaii, and I've been reading it, and it's really freaking amazing, because you're like, wow. It's just kind of nice to have something different and make you kind of curious. So I'm hoping that we'll get more of that out there so people can appreciate it a lot more, because there's some stuff like my friend Steve, my boss Steve, he's from the Caribbean, and some of the stories he tells me is like creepy as hell. I mean, really creepy. And it's like, one of these days, I'm hoping we can have him on the show so he can tell some of his stories, because he's had some really weird, strange things happen to him when he was a kid. So that's what I'm really hoping, is that we have more cultural, different folklore and all that brewing up in the horror genre.
Really quick, Lisa, have you heard of Every Drop is a Man's Nightmare?
No, I haven't. I've actually been out of the horror literature thing for a little while.
Okay.
Like,
you said like indigenous Hawaiian folklore. Megan Kakimoto is Japanese and Native Hawaiian, and her short story collection is full of indigenous ghost stories. Every Drop is a Man's Nightmare. It sounds like you would love it. So just wanted to
I probably would, because I love both Hawaiian and Japanese culture.
Yes.
We'll have to add it to the list.
Definitely
I got a whole spreadsheet, y'all.
You'll have to send it to me, because I won't remember.
Yes. And actually, guys, any of the books that we talked about today, if you want to listen to them and still support, or read them / listen to them, and you want to support Book and Bottle, check out this really cool app. It's called Libro FM, right? And you can actually pick a local bookshop to support and get credit for that audio purchase. So definitely check them out. I've actually bought a number of different books to listen to from them for Book and Bottle. So,
oh, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a really cool app. Plus, they have like a membership thing where you get like a free like book download every month. So it's cool. Check it out. Not sponsored. We are not sponsored by them.
Libro FM, what up?
Carol, how about you? What are your final thoughts and hopes for the genre?
Well, I think that the fact that it is coming to the fore again, that there is a wider interest, that there are some advantages to having a genre go somewhat mainstream, just because more people, are involved in it. I think one thing that has helped with that is that, younger people who have been fans of these kinds of things are now, getting to be adults, and I don't mean just young adults, but I mean, maybe not as old as me, but they're still, when you've got people in their 30s and 40s who grew up liking the stuff that was a little bit, that it was more under the radar, you raise it to where it comes to the fore, and more people, I think, are embracing it. And it's not just with horror. I think that's true with a number of things. And I think that, I think that trend will continue. And I do agree that I think, with Lisa, that I think it's nice to see other cultures represented. And I think in the last probably decade, and Dominic would know this much better than me, that's probably been happening, through that time period. It's becoming more common to see, that kind of thing. It's, I can't help thinking about Reservation Dogs. The show that Reservation Dogs that had so many kinds of, it had genre elements in it. And I've often thought, oh, I'm going to cover that on the Urban Fantasy track, because a lot of our other shows got canceled. Why not talk about Reservation Dogs? Guys talking to spirits all the time, and stuff like that. But I mean, I think that helps in terms of raising people's awareness, and from a cultural standpoint, from a literary standpoint, from just an enjoyment standpoint. And I just hope that trend continues, that that more people flock to the genre because they see the value in it, and not just, oh, I don't like scary stuff, and dismiss it out of hand. It's like, well, do you have a job? You you probably have had some horror in your life if you had a job anywhere, that kind of thing. So I hope that continues.
Yeah. Dominic, how about you?
I think I have two thoughts. To echo what has been previously mentioned of the beautiful part about it being so popular now is that with more eyes on it, publishers can make more money.
Right. Exactly.
More content. And sometimes that content can become diluted. But depending on where you look, that means that more content from different kinds of people is being purchased. You can see a direct upswing of Jordan Peele's success with his, and then we have way more Black authors being released. Publishers are taking a chance on Black horror anthologies. A new one that just came out is called The White Guy Dies First. You can't tell me that.
Oh, that's great.
It's great. It's freaking awesome. It's very interesting. It's well written. And you can't tell me that book comes out before Get Out, right? And so I think it's really important to use the library system. And we need to put our money where our mouth is and buy Black authors, buy Asian authors, buy authors that are here and who have something to say, and to put our money where our mouth is, because the publishers do listen. The publishers do listen. What I hope for the genre at large is that people, and I mean people overall, get less scared of being a horror junkie and can go into a bookstore.
We call them horrorholics.
Horrorholics. Probably should shadow junkie. But horrorholics, and not be satisfied with horror being lumped in with thriller and mystery anymore in their bookstores. I immediately look for a horror section when I go to a bookstore, and I am resolutely disappointed when it's lumped in with sometimes science fiction or fantasy, or all I see is Stephen King, right? And so making sure that we are asking for what we want, but also writers are not scared to use horror, the gothic, and the surreal, and the twisted, and the ghost story in their literary fiction. Two of my favorite books this year, State of Paradise by Laura Vandenberg and Cicada Summer by Erica McKean, both listed in the BISAC category, nowhere near horror. They're both listed as literary. And they have both unnerved me more than any horror book this year, except for Mariana Enriquez. They use these forms, these ways of storytelling, to go beyond a simple structure. And so I want writers, in the same way that Toni Morrison used the ghost story in Beloved, to reach farther and to get darker and get scarier, to show us what we can't always show ourselves. Because a novel is nothing but a mirror walking down the road, and we just have to hold it up. So I want
Mhm.
people to be brave and to get scared.
I love that. That's
That's
chef's
good.
kiss. Bravo. Bravo. We're gonna let Karen step in here for a second with her separately recorded thoughts on everything.
Alrighty. And even though this is recorded on a different day, we had to get Karen's opinions on all of this fun stuff. She is our bibliophile. So so Karen, what to you is the importance of horror literature and the history of horror literature?
For me, the importance of horror literature and the history of horror literature is the fact that we can learn where most of our horror come from, because most of the oral traditions that we've had are basically warnings to protect us from things that we didn't understand. I would say I would venture to go even farther back than the oral history to some of the cave paintings. For one group of people, it could have been like, oh, an instruction on, like, this animal and how to kill this animal. And others, it could be like a warning or a horrific story on, like, some people could die from, killing this animal. But my love of horror literature essentially came from my aunt, who was a teacher. She sadly passed
Hmm.
in August, because I never really was a good reader. So she's like, you know what? Maybe it's because of what you're reading. And so she handed me a horror book, which I forget if it was either John Saul or Dean Koontz or Stephen King, but she handed me a horror novel. And that's where my love for horror literature came from, is from her. So I would read as much as I could, from R.L. Stein to Stephen King, to Christopher Pike, and all that and so forth. So yeah, horror didn't really start for me, with just the folklore and whatnot. It For me, thinking back beyond that, I would say it started with the cave paintings,
Mm-hmm.
um, as an instruction and as a warning to those who come after them.
Yeah. So out of all the centuries that we have, because there's quite a few, obviously we have our ancient origins, so ancient mythology, folklore, cave paintings you're talking about. Then you have like the medieval, Renaissance time frame. Then we have the 18th century, the 19th century, 20th century, and now modern day. Which one is your favorite?
I mean, I would have to, like, lean back on the 19th century with Edgar Allan Poe
Mm-hmm.
and, Bram Stoker, and the Brothers Grimm. Those
Mm-hmm.
those were like quintessential to horror literature. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you had the other centuries, but it was kind of like more of a boom during that century. Even, you have, Charles Dickens doing his Christmas Story. For
Mm-hmm.
me, that's a horror story.
It
Um,
is.
some people just doesn't think of it as that, but it's a horror story
Mm-hmm.
because you have your morality in there. You question your morality on of greed, and pride, and so on. But yeah, the 19th century was like top tier for me. I mean, I could go pick up a book like, "Hey, I want to read this," and it's kind of harder to get like copies of, something before that, um,
Mm-hmm.
unless you go to the library. Like one of my friends, she's a historian, and she reads original copies, and
Oh
it's
wow.
in yeah, it's in, like, the original 16th, 17th language. And I tried to read it. I'm like, girl, she's like, hey, man, this is
It's a different kind
hand.
of English.
Yeah, she's like, this is handwritten. Sometimes I have to sit there and decipher it. And I was like, I can't do your job, because I don't know if it's from or 4th. I can't decipher these words. So yeah, I prefer like, the 19th century.
Yeah, that's the one that I picked.
I mean,
That
who
one's
wouldn't like, the Gothic?
yeah, yeah. Um, Now obviously your favorite works don't have to come from your favorite century, but what are a couple of your favorite works?
My favorite works right now is Grady Hendrix. I fell in love with the horror store that he wrote. It was magnificent. And I'll have to say,
Don't worry, y'all, we'll be doing an episode on
and I would have to
it.
say anything by Junji Ito. He is a manga horror artist, and he primarily does a lot of body horror. But from his works, I fell in love with Uzumaki. That was like the first story I read from him, and it's just that descent, that spiral into madness, and it's that slow, slow descent that got me. Junji Ito is like the master of horror.
Yeah.
Uh, where you have Stephen King, the master of literary horror, you have Junji Ito, the master of manga horror. But it's still literary. Yeah, some people can't, sit there and read a full book of lines, while they can look at pictures and read dialogue. It's still literary horror. A lot of people like poo-poo on manga, but it's like, hey, no, it's getting people to read. Okay,
Manga comic books, they're books.
they're books. I mean, as
They're
long as
books.
it gets, for me, it gets
Just
people
because
to
they
read.
got pictures doesn't mean it's not a book.
Yeah, my niece loves graphic novels, and it gets her to read. So
Yeah. I mean, that's how we all start.
yeah,
Picture books.
picture book. And her love of picture books kind of grew from there. She actually read Uzumaki. She read it because I said, if you could read Uzumaki, I'll let you watch My Hero Academia. She read the whole thing and told me everything about it. And I was like,
Okay.
and she's like, this is not that scary. I like it. I was like, okay.
Okay. And really, when people talk about like horror being scary or it has to be scary in order for it to be good or anything like that, I don't know.
It doesn't have to be
It
scary.
doesn't have to be.
It's that tension that you feel,
Mhm.
that winds you up until it snaps.
There needs to be that instinctual thing where like if things were to go wrong or if this was to be real, you should have that like instinct. But I don't, yeah, that's a whole other episode, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
We'll kind of wrap this up a little bit, but what are your final thoughts on just the history of horror literature as a whole? And then to kind of round it all out, what is your hopes for the genre?
Well, the importance of history is basically we learn where we come from. We learn where our ancestors come from. Um, but the genre is going to continue growing. You can see, the slow trudges from way back in, our forefathers to now. And it seems to be more of a boom in this modern century. Because I see a lot of horror authors coming out. Even with my favorite publishing company, Flagstaff Books, he has a lot of John Harkness has a lot of horror authors coming out of his production company. And then, you have a resurgence of 70s and 80s horror books thanks to Grady Hendrix with his book Paperbacks from Hell.
Yeah.
There are some books that, have been republished just because of that. And incidentally, I have a few of those. And I was like, hey, that one. Hey, I have that one. And just to see it come back, it's really nostalgic, and also it gives the people a sense of this is what they were doing back in the 70s and 80s. Man, drugs were really good back then, apparently, because some of those storylines, man, I'm like,
You're not wrong.
You almost been on something. But my hopes for the genre is to to keep on going, to keep on evolving, to keep finding new voices and new ways to tell a story.
Mhm.
And just like the movie industry, I don't think it'll ever slow down. I mean, you'll have your peaks, but I don't think it'll ever completely die out because of the fact that you have a lot of people
No.
who enjoy horror for what horror is, be
Mhm.
it literary works or be it movies or even, podcasts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've said it before when it comes to especially the movie realm of the genre. It's in the midst of becoming a new era, a new age. And I think the same is true for the literary sense, where the game is changing with it. The way that people are telling stories is different. So it's interesting to see how the genre itself is going to grow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I can't wait. I am here for the ride until the day I die. And then my nieces could take up the reins.
Right? Right? Helping to train my niece in the ways of horror loving. So,
Yep.
all righty. Well, Karen, thank you for taking your time to come on really quick and get your little 2 cents in. We
Hey,
know we missed you on the episode.
I missed y'all too, but life happens, family
Hmm.
emergencies. So
Hey, and family comes first.
I'm just happy to be part of everything. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. Stay spooky.
Bye.
Horror as written word can unnerve you with so few words, but then at the same time, place you in the most detailed scenario. And I think knowing horror and knowing how it has spawned from folklore and mythology and tales around the campfire, there needs to be a respect for it. There needs to be a love for it. And it's not always about jump scares and gore and all of that. It's about realizing who we are as individuals and processing through it. A lot of times what scares us the most is ourselves, is that mirror that we hold up and we look into and go, oh, that's scary. Um, and so my hope for the genre is that it continues to grow, but it continues to grow with integrity and that it continues to grow with respect for its origins. Growth for growth is not healthy. I want to see, like we've mentioned it before on different things where I'm like, yeah, I go in and I see these people who don't respect the genre. And when they don't respect the genre, it hurts the genre because then you have people who don't really love it and then don't get to have that real experience with it. And so I really truly hope for the genre that the people who do love it and who do respect it are the ones who really push forward with the evolution of it and the continued growth of it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, I don't know, that makes sense to everybody else. But I don't know, makes sense to me.
And also, like, sometimes I feel like we can wax poetic about horror,
Mhm.
and I want the genre to be taken seriously, and also sometimes Bucket of Blood is great. You
Mhm.
know, throw a bucket of blood on me. You know,
I love
it,
gore.
it's
Absolutely love it.
As
and
long
not
as it's real fake blood.
of entertaining horror,
Mhm.
but it can also just entertain.
Yeah.
It can just be Pulp Fiction. Like, let's not forget Weird Tales, which
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
this wonderful episodic magazine that like kept horror alive in the
Yeah.
early 20th. And it was like a lot of young boys and young girls reading
Mhm.
it, you know, the horror comics. It's just
Oh,
fun.
yeah.
No, yeah,
Fun.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's sort of because sometimes I can be very like, oh, it just means so much, and it's like everything, and also it's literally Frankenstein's about a freaking zombie, dude. It's
Yeah.
literally it's just a bunch of dead dude parts. It's so great,
It's just a
So
bunch of dead dude parts. That's going to be the name of the episode.
Right.
No, it's not. Although when we do Frankenstein, first of all, Dominic, you have to come back. And then second of all, that's what we'll call it. It's just a bunch of dead dude parts.
dead dude parts.
Thank you both for coming on. Honestly, this has been so much fun. I truly enjoyed my time with y'all. But we're not done yet.
Oh, yeah.
It is my favorite part when we have a new guest on. It is the electric chair. So with the electric chair, Dominic, we're strapping you in. Don't worry. The three of us have already, or four of us, I should say, if we count Karen, have all survived it. We've had multiple other people survive it, so you're in good hands. We're here with you. We'll support you, but we are strapping you in. If you survive, you do get a sticker.
Hell yeah, brother! I'll do a sticker. A sticker is the new Klondike bar.
Right? I have mine. I got mine. Yeah,
she did. She got hers at the con. All right, so dun, dun, dun. First question: who is your favorite horror villain? And it can be from any sort of media. And I would like to know why.
Man, I thought about this so much, and I have 3 answers, and they're all annoying. I think the first time I fell in love with a horror movie was Nightmare on Elm Street. And that is precisely because Freddy Krueger was not like anything I'd ever seen before.
Yeah.
Charismatic, but not slapstick yet. Grotesque. He had motive, and you couldn't escape him. And I was like, that's the worst. I'm 10. I hate this. And I watched it from the hallway, peeking because I was so queasy. I had to be close to the bathroom. Too much information, maybe, but
it explains a lot. It explains a lot.
Yeah, explains a lot about my personality. Not me killing people in their sleep, but everything else. My wonderful fashion sense and my charisma. Period.
And sick dance moves.
Sick dance moves, truly. My serious answer is The Dark is my favorite villain. Okay, it's what you don't see. And my recent answer is Dan Stevens in anything. Him in Cuckoo as the German scientist. Oh my God. Just twirling his mustache in the best way, having the best time. I think he's like the modern Vincent Price. It's just it's just great.
Okay. Now we've come to Kiss, Marry, Kill Literary Edition.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And so since you said that like 20th to modern day is your favorite centuries, we're going to go with some authors from that time frame.
Yeah.
Let's start with kind of iconic, so we kind of have to say him. Stephen King.
Okay.
We'll say Shirley Jackson.
Okay.
And to make this difficult, Marina as well. So.
Okay.
Listeners, he just face palmed so hard.
Okay. How do you want the sequence? Does it matter? Does it matter?
Doesn't matter. However you want to do it.
Sorry, am very sorry to my mom who turned me on to Stephen King very young. He's dead. He's
That's fair.
he's dead so fast. Like, I don't know, man.
Can
The
you at least give him an iconic death?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm giving him like Mufasa. My like talons are in his paws, and there's wildebeest underneath him. No, there's actually like a gazillion Pennywise the clowns that he's like falling.
Ooh, nice.
Old school.
Old school. No,
Maybe
ain't-
a few pets from the pet cemetery.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. All those tiny little cats. So sorry, Stephen King. You're just not my vibe. You're someone else's vibe. You're my mom's vibe. My vibe, baby. And then the hard part.
Yes.
I
You're
feel
welcome.
yeah, I hate you. I hate you as a friend. I have to say, I would I would kiss Mariana
Hmm.
because I have the biggest crush on that woman's brain. Biggest crush. But I would marry Shirley Jackson. I read those Good Housekeeping articles. I would be such a better husband than her dimwit. So I feel like we'd have a little less trouble. But who knows? Who knows? I can't be for sure.
You're
But
willing to take the risk anyway,
I'm
right?
willing to take the risk, dude.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for making me go through something so terrible.
You're welcome. But you know what? I feel like you discovered something about yourself and all of that.
Yes.
So you're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, the final question in the electric chair is, what is your horror hot take? So what is your opinion that most do not agree with you on about the horror genre as a whole? You can limit it to certain forms of media, but you don't have to.
When I first thought of this, I have to say I think my horror hot take is it's not cool to not like Long Legs. The movie that just came out. It's not cool to not
Okay.
like, you know. I enjoyed it for what it was,
Yes.
which is a spiffy version of Silence of the Lambs with Nicolas Cage.
Okay.
And it's beautiful aesthetically, and it's not perfect. But man, the amount of people who were like, "We're supposed to rewrite the genre," and and I was like, "Shut up!" Like literally, shut up. Like you fell for the commercials, and you were disappointed. Go away. Find another movie. Like, don't ruin it for other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So overall, it's not cool to yuck other people's yums in this tiny family that we have that is the horror genre. But I am using Long Legs as my personal.
I'm cool with that. I agree with you. Yeah.
too.
To me that's not a hot take, but
Oh, okay. Okay.
but hey, if you have found that more people are like, nah, then go for it. All right. So Dominic, you have survived the electric chair. Bravo.
Yay!
You'll get your sticker hand delivered. Actually, with a couple stickers hand delivered. So, but again, Carol, Dominic, thank you all so much for being on this podcast with us today. We really enjoyed having you, and really, truly, it's an honor. I loved your guys' takes on everything. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So listeners, which horror novel is your favorite? And it's okay if it's Stephen King, despite what Dominic says.
That's right. You better get him before he dies because of what Dominic said. So.
Right.
Just saying.
Other books.
But
there was actually a very interesting interview with him on PBS a week or two ago.
Oh, okay.
That people may want to check out. I know you can find it online because I've seen it show up in my. We happen to be watching the news when it came on. The extended edition is available on the PBS YouTube page. So
we'll see if we can find that and add it to our Facebook group for everybody.
Cool.
Yeah. So, listeners, favorite novel, come tell us. Again, it's okay if it's Stephen King, although we'd love to hear if it's not. Like, that'd be really cool too. But come tell us on our social media so we can continue this conversation, because we love chit-chatting with y'all. We are on Instagram. We are on TikTok. We are on X. We are on Threads. And we've got a killer kick-ass Facebook group that we want you guys to be a part of as well. You can also listen to this podcast wherever you listen to them. You can like, subscribe, rate us, the whole shebang. Basically anywhere like Apple, Google, Spotify. And we are on YouTube. So we really would love for you guys to come and chit-chat in the comments section there. But Dominic, Carol, where can they find you guys at to follow you? Or do you guys have anything you guys want to promote while you're here? Carol, why don't you start first?
Well, in terms of DragonCon, you can go to Facebook and just put in DragonCon Urban Fantasy, and our page will pop up. It stays active all year long. The months surrounding con, which is always Labor Day weekend, it's most active then, but I keep it going all year round. So that's a good place to get information about things going on for the track, especially, but sometimes in the genre as a whole, both books and media. And also, we do have a YouTube channel that has a combination of we actually did a Supernatural rewind where we went through every single season of Supernatural. Took a few years because we did one a month for several months, and then there was this thing called DragonCon that I had to stop for and not do one a month for a little while. And then so to get through 15, it took a while, but it was great. And we've done it for Buffy, we've done it for Lost Girl, and we will be doing something else this year. So you can check those out. I've got lots of author interviews, all that on the YouTube channel. Again, just go to YouTube and look up DragonCon Urban Fantasy, and here we are.
Rock on. Rock on. Dominic, how about you?
You can follow me literally in book and bottle on any shit. So please visit me at the store. You can follow Book and Bottle on Instagram. There's also an email newsletter. You can also follow me on my personal Instagram. It's how art thou underscores between each. My last name's Howarth. Aha, so clever. Post all the books that I read there, which skews more horror, but I, as being the book buyer and also just a fan of books, read absolutely everything. So yeah, follow me around. Let's talk about books.
Lisa, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram. You can also find me now on TikTok because the girls talk me into it. So I'm doing a lot of my projects on there, especially a lot of my spooky hiking adventures here lately. Mm-hmm. And then I'm working on setting up my YouTube so you can actually see me working. So
perfect.
That's where you can find me.
If you go to our link tree that will be in the description, you can actually find all of Karen's social media there. There's a special little spot for her. And then you can find me, Shannon, at Spilled Tea Wine Media Mind on all the things, all the different platforms. But before we go, listeners, our spooky little ghouls, thank you so very much for coming and listening to this episode. We really do appreciate you and your support. It means the world to us. We really couldn't do this without you. So stay spooky, our lovely little ghouls.
And this has been the Spooky and Cookie Podcast of Earth Station Boo.